The first time my parents told me I'd be marrying my 29-year-old cousin, Caleb, was the night after my 17th birthday. They said it like they were offering me a scholarship, not a prison sentence. Mom's voice was all honey as she explained that our family's bloodline was superior, chosen. Dad just nodded, adjusting his glasses like he was presenting a lecture instead of destroying my life. They said the wedding would take place in Charleston, South Carolina, the day after my high school graduation. Caleb had already booked the plantation venue. My future, they told me, was all mapped out, and it didn't belong to me. Caleb was tall, blonde, with that polished Southern gentleman look that outsiders might think was charming. To me, he was a nightmare with a smile. He'd been grooming me since I was 12, under the disguise of cousin bonding. He'd drive me around in his silver pickup, telling me how lucky I was to be chosen, how many children I'd bear, and how my hips just needed to develop a little more. I'd sit frozen, praying the drive would end, while he'd rest his hand just a little too long on my shoulder. Mom encouraged it. She'd curl my hair and say, "Be sweet to your future husband." Dad would conveniently leave us alone for hours, pretending not to hear my excuses when Caleb showed up. Our dining room looked more like a science lab than a home. Dad had covered the walls with family trees and DNA charts, each red line connecting cousins like cattle pedigrees. He'd been a genetics professor once, but after universities fired him for radical theories, he continued his research in our basement. He called it the Founders Project. His calculations always ended the same way, me and Caleb, producing the strongest heirs. The older I got, the less they even pretended I had a choice. At 16, Mom started homeschooling me. She said the outside world was corrupt, that teachers might poison me with dangerous ideas about independence. She made me read dusty books about racial purity and memorize bloodlines going back 10 generations. Some nights, lying in bed, I'd trace escape routes on the ceiling with my eyes, knowing every door was locked and every dollar controlled by them. Things got worse once Mom dragged me to a specialist. His office looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, yellow walls, cracked leather chairs, the faint smell of bleach. He wasn't licensed anymore, but my parents trusted him because he believed in their superior genetics nonsense. He examined me like livestock, declaring me optimal for childbearing. Then he handed my parents a fertility calendar with my ovulation days circled in red. Caleb loved talking about it at dinner. He'd smirk over mashed potatoes and say, "Our firstborn will have perfect Nordic features. We'll restore this family's glory." My parents would beam, like I'd already become their breeding stock. I tried to tell my teachers at school before Mom pulled me out, but the administration already thought I was a liar. My parents had donated so much money that nobody dared challenge them. They spread the story that I was fragile and liked to make things up. Even my older brother, Luke, laughed when I begged him for help. "I married my second cousin last year," he shrugged. "It's not a big deal." I felt like livestock waiting for auction. And then I found the diary. It was tucked inside a box of old quilts in the attic, hidden under moth-eaten blankets that smelled like dust and cedar. My grandmother's handwriting was shaky, but her words were knives. Page after page of forced marriages, girls punished for refusing, and correction procedures that left them barren. 3 aunts had tried to run and were brought back broken. Another cousin fell down the stairs days before her wedding to a much older man. The last entry chilled me most: "They will kill you before they let you contaminate the bloodline." I wanted to scream, but instead, I hid the diary under my mattress. It became the only thing keeping me sane, proof I wasn't crazy. When Caleb visited next, I couldn't stop staring at him, imagining his smug smile smeared across the diary's pages. I finally understood, this wasn't just my nightmare. It was generations of girls before me, trapped, silenced, erased. One night, I used a code my grandmother had written to contact an escaped cousin. Her name was Rachel, and she'd been living under a new identity in another state for 10 years. She said there was a whole underground network helping girls like us escape. Her voice was steady, but she warned me, "They'll hunt you. They'll use the police, the courts, even doctors. but freedom's worth the fear. We arranged a plan. She'd pick me up the next weekend during Caleb's visit, while my parents were distracted by wedding preparations. I memorized every step. I barely slept. My body thrummed with adrenaline every time I pictured climbing into her car and leaving everything behind. But then, something slipped. The night before Rachel was supposed to come, Caleb showed up earlier than usual, with 2 other cousins. Dad locked the front door while Mom whispered about moving the wedding up. They knew about the diary. I saw Caleb pull a syringe from a medical bag. "The sedatives will make you more cooperative," he said, smiling. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Escape wasn't just risky anymore. It was the only way to survive. But that wasn't the worst of it, not even close. Caleb's smile made my stomach twist. He held the syringe like it was some kind of love token, promising that once the drug hit, I'd finally cooperate. Mom grabbed my wrists, her nails digging into my skin. Dad set up an 4-bag like this was all routine. The ceremony tonight, consummation immediately after, he muttered like a scientist ticking boxes on a clipboard. Pregnancy must be confirmed before she does anything stupid again. I thought my body would shut down from fear. But instead, instinct took over. I yanked forward and drove my knee as hard as I could into Caleb's groin. His face collapsed in pain. The syringe clattered to the floor. I twisted out of Mom's grip and bolted. Dad lunged at me, shouting, but I ducked under his arms, grabbed grandmother's diary from the table, and sprinted for the stairs. Behind me, Caleb groaned on the carpet while Mom screamed, "Don't let her get away." I slammed myself into the upstairs bathroom, jammed a chair under the knob, and listened as footsteps thundered up behind me. The door rattled violently. Dad's voice barked orders. Someone ran for his toolbox. Metal scraped. The hinges were coming off. My hand shook as I typed out Rachel's emergency code into my phone. I'd practiced this escape 100 times in my head, but nothing prepared me for the sound of wood splintering behind me. The bathroom window was already loose from those practice runs. I shoved it open, climbed onto the sink, and squeezed myself through. My body scraped against the frame, but I pushed until I fell onto the garage roof below. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed, but I didn't stop. The bathroom door burst open just as I slid down the shingles and dropped into the yard. Caleb's voice bellowed, "She's in the back." I limped toward the tree line, adrenaline drowning out the pain. The woods behind our house were my only hope. I'd played there since I was a child. I knew every creek, every fallen log, every deer trail. My parents' flashlight slashed through the darkness as they fanned out, yelling my name like hunters calling to a hound. My phone buzzed. "Rachel, Old Bridge." 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I could survive 5 minutes. The creek path carried me deeper into the dark. Every step on my twisted ankle sent fire shooting up my leg, but stopping wasn't an option. The trees opened up and the bridge appeared, but it was empty. No Rachel. No car. Nothing but the rushing water below. Panic tore through my chest. I pressed myself behind a concrete support beam just as headlights cut through the woods. My father's truck. He rolled across the bridge, spotlight sweeping the trees. Caleb's voice crackled over the CB radio, coordinating search patterns like this was a military op. I held my breath, convinced they'd see me. My ankle throbbed. My palms bled from where I'd scraped against the shingles. The truck crawled across the bridge, paused, then continued on. I stayed frozen, counting 60 slow seconds. And then, headlights again. Not Dad's. A grey Honda. Rachel. I sprinted from hiding, yanked the back door open, and dove inside. "Go, go, go." I gasped. She floored it before the door even closed. My father's truck appeared in the rearview, barreling toward us. For 10 full minutes, I lay flat across the back seat while Rachel's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Stay down. Don't look. Don't breathe. We finally outmaneuvered him at a truck stop 2 hours away. I limped into the fluorescent-lit bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and pulled out the diary again. The pages about safe houses were smeared with water damage, but I traced the words anyway. Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. There were places for girls like me. Rachel knocked gently on the stall. "We can't stay here long," she whispered. "They'll mobilize fast. We need to keep moving." Back in the car, my swollen ankle pulsed with every bump on the highway. Rachel explained the rules of the network, 6 months of no contact with anyone from my past, while lawyers built a case. New ID. New name. Safe houses. She'd helped a dozen girls already. Some made it, some didn't. "You can't trust anyone now," she said, her voice firm. "Not teachers, not cops, not even extended family. They've got connections everywhere." I nodded, staring out at the mountains disappearing behind us. I thought I'd feel free. But the only thing I felt was hunted. The next morning, we stopped at a diner 3 states away. The scrambled eggs on my plate went cold as I scanned the TV above the counter. Local news. No mention of me. No Amber Alert. No missing person. Rachel noticed my confusion. "They won't report you missing," she said softly. "They'll handle it inside the family. Just like your grandmother warned." Her phone rang. She stepped outside, face tense, pacing as she spoke. When she returned, she dropped into the booth like a weight had been added to her shoulders. "Your family's already moving roadblocks. We need to switch cars. Now." She led me to a blue sedan parked behind the diner, keys waiting under the mat. A stranger had left it for us. Another survivor. I stared at the Honda we were abandoning, the last link to the plan I thought I could trust. My chest tightened. If the car was compromised, what else was? Rachel must have read the fear on my face. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "This is how we stay ahead. We keep moving. We stay one step in front. Do you understand?" I nodded, but inside, I wasn't sure. Because for the first time, I wondered, if they had so much power, money, doctors, cops, what chance did I really have? And I had no idea that Rachel was right. We weren't one step ahead. We were already being followed. The new sedan smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old coffee. Rachel drove with one hand on the wheel, eyes flicking constantly to the mirrors. Every time headlights appeared behind us, my stomach knotted. "Don't stare," she murmured. "Just notice. Always notice." I pressed grandmother's diary against my leg like it was a shield. Every page reminded me this wasn't paranoia, it was survival. But as the miles rolled on, another memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought about in years. When I was 10, I'd begged Dad to let me sign up for soccer. I loved the idea of running free across a field, kicking, laughing, being part of something normal. He finally agreed, but only because he called it good cardiovascular training for fertility. Mom had stitched my jersey herself, bright red with my last name across the back. At my first game, I scored the winning goal. My teammates cheered, my coach patted my shoulder, and for a second, I felt like a real kid. That night, Caleb came over. I was still in my uniform, mud on my knees, grinning as I told him what happened. He listened, smiling that calm, patronizing smile. Then he leaned close and whispered, "Enjoy the running while you can. Once you're mine, you'll be barefoot and pregnant, not chasing balls." He said it like a joke, but I saw the truth in his eyes. That was the night I stopped playing soccer. Now, sitting in the passenger seat of the sedan, ankle throbbing, I realized I'd been running ever since. And maybe I'd never stop. Rachel tapped my arm. "We'll stop at a rest area in 20 minutes. Bathroom, stretch, then keep moving." But when we pulled in, my blood went cold. A state trooper cruiser sat near the entrance, engine idling. Rachel's jaw tightened. Stay calm. Walk normal. Don't run. We parked far from the officer, who was scrolling on his phone but kept glancing up at cars as they passed. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to walk beside Rachel toward the restrooms. Inside, she steered me past the stalls to a door marked maintenance only. She pushed it open without hesitation. A woman waited on the other side with keys to a running minivan. She had short grey hair, crow's feet around her eyes, and a soft smile that didn't quite reach them. "I'm Carol," she said. "Get in quick." Rachel gave me a look that said don't question it, so I slid into the back seat. Carol drove steady, hands at 10 and 2, like she'd done this 100 times. Rachel kept checking behind us. After 10 silent minutes, Carol finally spoke. "I escaped at 19. They wanted me to marry my uncle. I got out, but I had to leave my daughter behind." Her voice cracked on that word. "She's 30 now, and still trapped." Her words sank like lead in my chest. I thought of my grandmother's diary, all the names and dates of girls who didn't make it. Was that my future too, surviving but leaving pieces of myself behind? Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "She's with us now. That's what matters." But then Carol added something that made my blood freeze. "Your parents filed a kidnapping report. They're telling the news you were brainwashed by a cult." I swallowed hard. "So, the police?" "They're not on your side," Carol said flatly. "Not when half your family's network funds their campaigns." Silence filled the van. The only sound was the wipers scraping against the windshield as rain started to fall. 3 days later, I was holed up in a tiny apartment in a city I didn't recognize, trying to remember my new name, Emily Ward. Fake ID, fake birthday, fake everything. A lawyer from the network handed me papers and said, "Write everything while it's fresh." So I wrote. 20 pages about Caleb, the doctor, the vitamins, the restraints. My hand cramped, but I kept going until the memories blurred together. That night, the burner phone buzzed. Rachel answered first, her expression unreadable. Then she handed it to me. Luke's voice crackled through the line. "Mom's in the hospital." She collapsed. "Please, Emma, just call. Let her know you're alive. She might not make it." My hand trembled. For a second, the girl inside me, the daughter who once believed her parents' love was unconditional, almost answered. But then Luke's tone shifted. Cold. Calculated. "Even if you don't call, we'll find you. With or without your help." Rachel snatched the phone away and hung up. "They're tracing us. Pack your stuff. We're moving now." Within an hour, we were on the road again. As the city lights faded behind us, I stared at grandmother's diary in my lap. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. Every page screamed the same truth. This wasn't a family. It was a system. And systems don't stop just because one girl runs. But I had no idea just how far their system reached, or how much worse it was about to get. The next safe house looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. A little ranch home with white shutters, an American flag on the porch, and an elderly couple waiting in matching sweaters. They smiled like kindly grandparents, ushering me in with the smell of pot roast and fresh bread. For the first time in weeks, I let my shoulders drop. Maybe, just maybe, this was what safety felt like. We sat around the table that night, steam rising from mashed potatoes. The woman, Linda, showed me faint scars on her arms. "My family tried to marry me to my uncle when I was 15, she said softly. "We escaped. You're safe here." Her husband, Robert, nodded. "We've been helping girls like you for 40 years. 14 rescued so far." It sounded too good to be true. And it was. 2 weeks later, I woke at 3 a.m., thirsty. As I passed the hallway, voices drifted from the kitchen. I froze. Robert's voice, low and calm, "Yes, we have Emma. The real one." Not another runaway using that name. We'll bring her in gently once she trusts us more. My stomach dropped. The diary nearly slipped from my hands. I stumbled backward silently, heart slamming against my ribs. They weren't rescuers. They were bounty hunters. I crept back to my room, jammed my essentials into my backpack, and shoved the diary inside. My hand shook so hard I fumbled the zipper twice. Then I slid the window open and climbed barefoot into the cold grass. The back door opened behind me. Flashlights cut across the yard. Dogs barked. Linda's voice was sharp now, nothing like the sweet woman from dinner. She's heading for the street. I ran, gravel slicing my feet. My lungs burned as I ducked behind cars, cutting random corners to lose them. Porch lights flicked on. Neighbors stepped out in robes, confused by the chaos. I spotted an unlocked sedan in a driveway and dove inside, curling under an old jacket. From the crack under the seat, I watched Linda and Robert comb the neighborhood with three men I'd never seen before. Their beams of light swept over yards, garages, trash bins. They searched for hours. I didn't breathe until dawn broke and their car finally pulled away. By then, my feet were bleeding and numb. But I couldn't stay. I limped for miles until I found a library opening its doors. In the corner computer lab, I pulled up the network's emergency site, typing the codes Rachel had taught me. When I searched Robert and Linda's names, their photos popped up under a chilling category, Interceptor Network. They'd been catching runaways for over 15 years, pretending to help while secretly delivering girls back to their families. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, bile rising in my throat. I'd been off the real network's radar for 3 whole days. They probably thought I'd been captured already. Shaking, I dialed the only number I'd ever memorized before all this, my old school counselor, Ms. June. She'd been the only adult who ever looked at me with real concern, the one who once asked about the bruises on my arm when I'd accidentally worn short sleeves. I hadn't told her then, too scared. But now, I had nothing left to lose. She answered on the 3rd ring. Emma? Oh my God, is that really you? Her voice cracked. Your parents told everyone you joined some cult. They said you were brainwashed. The words came out in a flood. Everything, Caleb, the doctor, the diary, the escape. I half expected her to hang up. Instead, she whispered, "Stay put. I'm coming to get you." I begged her not to. It was too dangerous. But she'd already hung up, engine roaring in the background before the line went dead. 3 days later, I was holed up in a dingy motel room, curtains drawn tight, every sound making me flinch. Miss June finally pulled up in an old Honda at dawn, hair dyed black, clothes nothing like the teacher I remembered. We drove in tense silence for 2 hours. Then I noticed it, a black SUV in the mirror, 3 cars behind, matching every lane change. My blood ran cold. They found us. Miss June's knuckles went white on the steering wheel, but her voice stayed calm. I've been documenting them since last year. I have photos, essays you wrote, bruises they couldn't explain. If they catch us, I'll show the police everything. But right now, she took the next exit without signaling, heart hammering. We run. The SUV followed. She swerved into a police station parking lot. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe this was it, maybe law enforcement would finally listen. But when Caleb climbed out of the SUV, dressed sharp, hair slicked back, my heart stopped. He strode toward the station doors like he owned the place, holding a thick folder under his arm. Inside, his act was flawless. "She's mentally unstable," he told the desk sergeant, his voice smooth. "My cousin's been sick for years. This woman," he gestured at Ms. June, voice dripping with contempt, "has been grooming her, convincing her we're dangerous. We just want her home for proper psychiatric treatment." He handed over medical files, signed by 3 different doctors. Diagnoses I'd never heard before: false memory syndrome, delusional paranoia, persecution complex. All describing me. The officer flipped through the papers, brows furrowed. Miss June squeezed my arm and whispered, "Show them." "The diary. Now." My fingers trembled as I placed grandmother's diary on the counter. The sergeant opened it, scanning shaky handwriting about correction procedures, girls disappearing, even names of officers who'd returned runaways before. One of those names made his jaw tighten. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. But Caleb leaned in, voice low, dangerous. "If you let her walk out of here, you'll regret it. My family doesn't forget." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about my freedom anymore. It was about whether the truth would even survive long enough to matter. They separated us into different rooms at the station. For the first time, Caleb's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes burned with fury, and he mouthed one word over and over, "Liar." The sergeant called in a detective named Torres. She took the diary and read page after page in silence. Her face went pale when she hit the section naming officers who had been paid to return runaway girls. One of the names? Her own former partner. She closed the diary, exhaled, and said, "You're not going anywhere with him." Caleb exploded. He shouted about family rights, religious persecution, parental authority. He demanded they arrest Ms. June, demanded they'd return me. But Torres didn't budge. She called state authorities and placed me in protective custody that same night. The shelter had barred windows and a guard at the front door, but I still couldn't sleep. Every footstep in the hallway made me clutch the diary tighter, whispering my grandmother's warning, "Trust no one completely. Always have another exit." The next morning, a federal agent arrived. Janet Rodriguez. Short, tough, no nonsense. She'd spent years on trafficking cases, but she admitted she'd never seen documentation this detailed. My grandmother's diary, she said, could expose an entire breeding network. Within days, I was moved again, this time to a vetted foster family in the suburbs. The Johnsons. They had 2 kids and a golden retriever who tried to climb into my lap the first night. Their house felt impossibly normal, dinner at the table, doors that locked from the inside, no lectures about bloodlines. But normal didn't erase fear. Walking to school, I spotted my brother Luke across the street holding a cardboard sign, "Mom in hospital, please come home." He didn't chase me. He just stood there, eyes full of something I couldn't read. That night, Rodriguez played me recordings pulled from my parents' phones. Dad's voice, clinical and cold, discussing retrieval plans for their breeding stock, meaning me. Caleb's voice describing basement protocol. Sedatives. Forced insemination. Hearing it confirmed what the diary had already told me. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't crazy. This was real. A month later, the FBI raided my parents' house. They found the chart still covering the dining room walls, the sedatives in the basement, even 3 pregnant teenagers living in the house. On camera, my parents played the part of persecuted saints. Dad claimed traditional values were under attack. Mom cried about government overreach. Some politicians even defended them. It was bigger than just my family. It was a system with money, power, and friends in high places. And then came the trial. I'll never forget walking into that courtroom, seeing Caleb in his pressed suit, sitting in the 3rd row, staring at me like he still owned me. My palms were slick with sweat as I swore to tell the truth. For 3 hours, I told the jury everything. The unlicensed doctor who declared me optimal. The fertility vitamins. The breeding charts plastered across the walls. The night they tried to strap me down for a rushed wedding. Caleb shook his head the entire time, mouthing "Liar, liar, liar." The judge warned him to stop, but his eyes never left mine. When I finished, my voice cracked, but I didn't look away. The defense fought back hard. They called experts to explain how I was suffering from false memory syndrome, how siblings could create shared delusions. They produced therapy notes I'd never seen, prescriptions I'd never taken. Then my mother took the stand. She wore black, dabbed her eyes, and said she was just a grieving widow who'd lost her husband to suicide and her daughter to madness. She painted me as mentally unstable, claimed the diary was fiction, a fantasy written by a woman who'd lost her mind decades ago. The jury watched her cry. Some nodded sympathetically. I wanted to scream. But then, Rachel testified. She appeared by secure video feed, hair pulled back, voice steady. She named girl after girl she'd helped escape. She played recordings of Caleb himself, his voice chillingly casual as he talked about what would happen once we get her back. The basement's ready. She'll need correction. The courtroom went silent. Even 2 jurors started crying. The judge ordered Caleb removed for an outburst when the recordings played. My mother sat stone-faced, eyes boring into me like she still believed she could command me with a glance. After weeks of testimony, the jury went to deliberate. For 3 days, I barely ate. Barely slept. Protesters screamed outside the courthouse, some calling me a liar, others calling me brave. When the verdict finally came, the foreman's voice shook. Caleb, guilty of attempted kidnapping, not guilty of conspiracy. Mom, not guilty on all counts. The broader network charges? Dismissed for lack of evidence. The room spun. Caleb would serve maybe 5 years. My mother walked free. The system survived. She smiled at me across the courtroom, a cold, victorious smile. That night, Agent Rodriguez slipped me a flash drive. Inside were every document, every email, every breeding chart the FBI had seized. Within a week, reporters started calling. Leaks hit the Washington Post. Survivors from other states came forward. The story exploded. Soon, federal raids swept across 12 states. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Dozens of arrests followed. And for the first time in generations, the breeding network began to collapse. Months later, Congress passed a law making forced genetic matching and cousin marriage breeding programs federal crimes. They called it Emma's Law. I stood in the White House Rose Garden with 12 other survivors as the president signed it. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked how it felt. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there, holding my grandmother's diary, knowing she was the reason I'd lived long enough to see this day. But here's the truth I don't say on TV. I still check every lock 3 times before bed. I still sleep with my backpack by the door. I still wake up hearing Caleb's voice whispering, just a little prick. I'm 19 now. Unmarried. Childless. Studying social work because I know exactly who I want to help. I was supposed to be barefoot and pregnant by now, trapped in a bloodline experiment. Instead, I'm free. But freedom doesn't erase fear. It just makes me dangerous to the system that tried to own me. And I'll never stop fighting.